Episode 235.
235.
I like numbers that end with 5.
Yeah.
It's interesting how every 0 through 9 or 1 through 10, they each have their own kind of emotional connection,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like 5 has got like a sturdiness.
More sturdy than the whole numerology thing, and that each number has a spiritual vibration and all of that. Yeah.
But you know why 6 is afraid of 7?
Because 7, 8, 9.
Yeah. Speaking of something else that has nothing to do with the thing, I was noticing, I think the background for today's image is from Hieronymus Bosch.
I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah, and have you ever, there's this picture of people being tormented in hell, and there's like the picture of someone like some dude like has music written on his butt as he's being tormented, and people are playing the music, and someone transcribed that. So if people were to go Google or go to YouTube and write Hieronymus Bosch butt music, there's actually arrangements of that you can listen to, including in the more of a heavy metal version. That's because it is the most metal thing to do is play Hieronymus Bosch butt music.
Yeah, that's kind of cool.
And that fits because this is all end of the world stuff somehow. Okay. We're continuing our conversation around the slow-moving, the sluggish apocalypse. And I'm Ash Van Snook. I direct the Center for Prophetic Imagination.
And I'm Daniel Walpert, direct Micah, the Minnesota Institute of Contemplation and Healing. And I saw that...
Morning, CK. Morning, everybody else who's listening.
We now have robot bugs.
I think we've had robot bugs for a while, but these are like smaller than gnats. They're gnat-sized surveillance drones.
Smaller than gnats.
Well, I will always show my fidelity to the Robot Bird Alliance.
Yes.
May they destroy and devour the gnat robots.
Well, but I was going to say, so the robot birds could become a delivery system for the robot gnats, sort of like aircraft carriers. Like the robot bird could fly in, and then a whole swarm of robot gnats could take off from there. So you would only need one robot bird, where maybe before you need like 10 or 12 for a neighborhood or something.
Nice.
So that fits with all of the stuff about like birds going extinct. And you'd say, oh yeah, the birds are disappearing, but really it's just that you need fewer robot birds and more robot gnats. It all fits together.
Yeah. Ellen writes, good morning. And also, gnats are a dream symbol for clear intuition. Can robots have that? Do robots dream of electric sheep? Sarius writes, robot burbs are being displaced by gnats. And then there's the
they're not being displaced. It's just now the robot birds have an additional function. They're gnat carriers.
Yeah.
And by the way, Sirius just released an incredible article. So anybody that's listening, go to my Facebook page or hers or maybe others. Check out our article. It's really, really good. Okay. What the hell are we talking about?
Fascism Friday.
Fascism Friday.
Okay. Do robot birds eat, I think, robot insects?
Probably.
They store them. Depends on if they're unless they're
so that's the thing. They don't carry them like aircraft carriers. They come out of their mouths. That's awesome. So the robot bird opens its mouth and the robot gnats pour out. And then when they're done with their mission, they go back in. So then it looks like the birds are eating bugs.
Well, you can weaponize. Well, I'm not going to go down this road. I could be lost forever.
I'm not going to go down this robot.
No road. Yeah. So fascism. Do you like it or for or against? No. Fascism. This is the thing. We're talking about apocalyptic visions, and maybe a good way to start this is, there are kind of two generally competing apocalyptic visions, and there's definitely an overlap. Like, I don't want to oversimplify a binary here, but generally speaking, if you're progressive or leftist at all, the apocalyptic fear is, look, capitalism and its other kind of isms are working together to exploit the earth in a way that is environmentally unsustainable and devastating, and then it particularly impacts lower income and nations with less infrastructure. So poor people get hit first, and those are disproportionately brown people. And at the same time, capitalism is also hastening this sort of like divide between rich and poor, human exploitation and degradation, dehumanization, blah, blah, blah.
Blah, blah,
horrible shit, bad. Then there's the kind of the other right wing, and this is the stuff that because there's an apocalyptic vision for the conservative way of thinking, and fascism being the hyper conservative, militaristic kind of thing, where the fear is like, look, there's all these refugees bouncing around. They're dirty people. They're coming to our borders, almost like an invading army, and they're degrading our civilization. They're making us less pure. Now, maybe people that are overtly white supremacists will say it's the browning of America is scary. Maybe they're more sophisticated and it's about the decline of the values of Western civilization. It's essentially the same thing.
It's the loss of Judeo-Christian values.
Yes. And that the problem is not just the people from outside, but in fact, there's a worse enemy within. Cultural Marxists, socialists,
CRT,
critical race theory, like people who are demanding rights even though they already have them, so they want to actually further pull down the white man. So it's not that black people are bad. It's just this whole thing about affirmative action is run amok. Students are learning Marxism in schools. Gays are gaying each other in gay fashion everywhere in the public now in front of students. Like this kind of like, it's all going to hell. Now like abortion, we can't even do like an abortion is run amok, and it's just this degradation of God's values. And then in the middle, you get the Malthusians who are like, they generally agree with leftist stuff, but they also think human beings are shitty in a way that almost seems conservative. And so it's like population control is bad because, the brown people are growing faster. So like there's just all kind of, that's where they start blurring together. But the fascist thing is about purity.
Yeah. So the right wing apocalyptic vision then sees fascism as a necessary corrective. Basically sees it as a good idea.
For sure, because it uses extraordinary means that would maybe otherwise be distasteful to crack down on a worse enemy. Well, I mean, this is the thing. Like, this would happen. It happened in Germany. It happened in Italy. It happened in Spain, where we saw fascism in Europe grow. Is the threat of Marxism had to be inflated so largely. And it was part of a cabal that sometimes included Jews, sometimes included the intellectuals, gay people are always in there, like all this sort of stuff. That this threat is so big that we don't want to have to do this. But you need us to do this to save our civilization and make Germany, Italy, Spain, America great again. To forestall this apocalyptic vision from becoming real.
Yeah, and and then when you look at, if you look at a place like China and what's going on there, the rhetoric is not exactly the same, but it's a very similar sort of line. It's basically like, look, we're facing all these problems and all these challenges and all these threats, whether it's from population, whether it's from poverty, whether it's from Islam, whether it's from different minorities. And, in order to keep the great society going and growing, we just have to do these things. We have to crack down on these things. And so it's, And it really dovetails very nicely with patriarchy, right? It's like, well, I didn't want to give you a spanking, but you kind of made me do it because you were misbehaving, right? And so it's that same kind of idea. It's that, because there's some sort of behavior that is deviating from what has been decided is the good norm, the normative behavior, we just, we have to do these distasteful things. And if only everything was fine and the way I wanted it, I wouldn't have to do that. But yep, just had to build those death camps for 1 million Uyghurs because, they just weren't towing the line. And so we had to do it. And so that, this compulsion and compunction to solidify reality in a particular way, and then control things and dominate things. Whether that's out of fear, whether that's out of a desire to become more powerful, whatever that may be. I mean, this is just this basic kind of human impulse that we can get caught in very quickly and very easily. And what always ends up happening with that is oppression of some form or another. And when you've adopted that stance, we've talked about this in terms of patriarchy, where, if men are used to being in charge all the time, equality feels like oppression to them, right? If you adopt this basic stance of rigidity along some normative line, then any loosening of that feels like disaster. Right? It feels like everything's going to hell in a handbasket. Right? It doesn't feel like liberation. It feels like apocalypse. And so then there's this need to reassert power and control.
Yep. And just so you know, since you used China as a bad example, I'm sure at some point a tanky is going to come on here and complain, because you can't use a communist state as a bad example. They are an interesting one of like this hybrid, like whether or not you can call them fascist or not is almost beside the point. They're definitely authoritarian, and it's tied up in a certain kind of nationalism and an ethnic group over other ethnic groups. So once you start doing that, that's aspects of fascism. And even if we couldn't call them technically fascism, there's no such thing as technical fascism anyways. It's kind of this sort of, it's this there, like you can't, we have a bunch of examples and we wanted to call them all fascists. And so we try to, there's this moving definition. But at the very least, nationalistic violence against other groups of people in order to make yourself strong and using authoritarian means is just shitty. It's just shitty no matter what you call it. But Angela, oh wait, go back to CK writes, fuck yeah, gay fashion. Did I say gay fascism? Fashion?
You did.
I talked about gay stuff all over the place, so maybe I threw the word fashion in there. CK writes, Angela Merkel is gone now. Germany can be fascist again.
Yep, she's finishing up.
CK says, it really feels like if so-called democracy falls in America, the rest of the world would fall into fascism. It's hard to say.
Yeah, it's definitely hard to say. I mean, I think that, I mean, the problem, democracy is a very challenging thing, right? Because, there is still always in every democratic society or quasi-democratic society, there is still a ruling class and a ruling vision. And the problem is, if population shifts, right, and numbers shift and demographics shift, then that ruling class can be threatened. And as soon as that happens, suddenly the ruling class doesn't think democracy is such a great idea anymore. Right? And we're seeing that, in India with Hindu nationalism. We're seeing that, all across Europe with the rise of these different right-wing parties. Obviously, in America, the GOP is trying as hard as they can to get as few people as possible to vote. I think it's a big tension because, and this is where we've talked about this a bunch, that if you eliminate any kind of class analysis from your conversation, things get sort of problematic because, you know, you have to recognize that there are different classes, right? And there are ruling and political classes, and they like being in power. And so often democracy is just a matter of shuffling around the characters within the ruling class, which isn't really democracy. And so, yeah, when they come under threat, they're going to want to undermine democracy.
That's right.
Sure.
Hell in a basket. Is that a laundry basket? Is that a hell in a handbasket? That's how I'm interpreting that.
Okay.
Yeah. This is the thing, you know, because right now it's even hard for people to even tell if something that's happening is fascistic, because the narratives we've heard about these people coming into power seems like a radical departure. That's the way we talk about them, rather than an intensification of the dynamics that were already there. So with Hitler or Spain, these were people that factions that already had power that then used to take over more of the kind of the dominating vision. But they weren't these outsiders who just came in and took it all over exactly. And so even with Trump, we kind of want to say like Trump is this anomaly who came from outside. It's like everything holding him up in power was the people that were already in power, using him and how they felt like they needed to shore up the things that were declining. And this is hard for us to talk about, because then we have to be willing to criticize, because some of the same people undergirding Trumpian power also maybe have donated to Democrats before, or maybe they were Democrats.
Yeah, well, and you know, we saw this yesterday, right? This whole thing about Washington being dysfunctional, right? Well, you know, yesterday the new defense appropriation bill sailed through the House, increasing militaristic spending by another, you know, $20-30 billion a year. And the majority of Democrats had no problem voting for that. And so, you know, oftentimes we get distracted by all of the other things that supposedly, you know, there's this massive divide between the two parties. But when it comes to buying weapons, which, I mean, let's face it, fascists need a lot of weapons. You know, both parties are on the same side. There really is zero difference between the two. And, you know, that gets obscured from view because it undermines the mythology that we have this true, radically different two-party system, which, you know, in many ways, it's the same class of people.
Ellen writes, it's the frog boil. Frog boil. Mentioned Wednesday, fascistic action is normalized with the shift of the Overton window. Mm-hmm. You know, maybe we just need to explain what the Overton window is, because sometimes a lot of people haven't heard of that. We've brought it up here in this conversation.
A cool window company?
Yeah, they make those windows that are also solar powered. Have you heard about this? The windows, it lets light through it and also powers your house. Now, Overton window is what's the acceptable range of conversation within public discourse, particularly around politics. And so if you have someone talking fascistic things like, you know, immigrants, Mexicans are violent and rapists, like the way Trump talked about it, and as long as that is okay to talk about, it pulls things this way. And then what happens is the left end of the window, the Democrats in the United States, are forced to talk more and more about right-wing things, and it legitimizes things. And so in the United States, in my lifetime, the Overton window has continued to move rightward. Now, this is where it gets interesting. I've had conversations with Democrats who disagree with that because we have gay marriage now. And so what happens is people look at these symbolic wins and they mistakenly use them as a way to say, look, we have progress in our society, without having the big picture of what's happening. And so within, you know, you had a flourishing of gay rights in some ways in Berlin before Nazism came about didn't mean the whole society was moving leftward. It's just, you can't, society isn't a tight little bundle that can be predicted by a few indicators like that.
Well, or we'll say, well, we had a black president, so we don't have racism anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that we had a black president right before we had one of the most fascistic presidents in modern American history, or the most, depending on where you want to put Reagan, I guess, is astonishing. And it tells us that this is like the complexity of where we're at as a society, and how it's still, even Obama was further right in certain economic matters than Richard Nixon. And you say that to someone and they freak the hell out.
Yeah, it's totally true. Well, and when you look at Republican presidents, you can really see the shift in the Overton window. I mean, people mention Reagan as this great satanic figure, which he certainly was at the time. I mean, Reagan could not be in the modern Republican Party. And Eisenhower certainly could not be in the modern Republican Party. Right? It's pulled so far to the right of the two of them. And so, if you look at those as several decades in between, it's clearly moving in that direction. All right, we've got some comments.
CK writes, I think with the forced migration we are seeing and all of it to come with climate crisis, that coming democracy will be hard to keep. Yeah, we have people resigning from the Biden administration over over the mistreatment of Haitian refugees. So here we have and this isn't being talked enough about because it's got to be better than what Trump was doing. So let's not make a big stink. There's some of that happening.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that the climate refugee issues, to me, we're finally starting to talk about climate change as like the big issue. But I think as a sort of a sub issue, the climate refugee crisis could be perhaps the most destabilizing thing that starts to happen. Right, way beyond particular temperature fluctuations or storms or things like that, right? And I think every time we have these incidents, whether it's with Central America, now we see with Haiti, again, we're talking about a relatively small number of people, right? I mean, 8,000 people is a huge number of people, but and I mentioned this before. I mean, a place like Bangladesh goes underwater, you're going to have 200 million people on the road, right? And that's something that we have absolutely no capacity to think about or certainly deal with at this point. And we see what happens when 8,000 people come, and then you've got these amazing, insane pictures of these guys on horses, whipping people, and all this really crazy stuff. Well, imagine if instead of 8,000 people, it was 800,000 people. And so, I mean, that issue, and again, there's no thinking about this in advance. There's no planning for it. And this is where the fascist impulse then comes, because if you haven't anticipated something, and then some crisis starts happening, your first response is this fear-based response of just stop, control. And that's where the fascist response to these apocalyptic things can occur very easily.
Well, and just to go back to my little apocalyptic visions thing and my Malthusian thing, this is why I bring up the Malthusian stuff just explicitly. So if the problem is climate change, and you have a vision that climate change is primarily caused by powerful people exploiting things in powerful systems, that this isn't just, I mean, I'm not saying individual choices have no bearing, but if it's not just because individuals aren't recycling enough, but it's because huge industries, the way the military, exploitate, blah, 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 the capitalist issue, then the way you fix that problem is different than if you have, this is where Handmaid's Tale becomes disturbingly potentially prophetic. So if you have a right-wing vision that is look, there's too many people at our borders, they're going to erode our system. If you're conditioned into capitalism to have a scarcity mindset, and even if you're progressive, all of a sudden we can't handle these millions of refugees. They're going to come and ruin our society. The problem is there's too many people, and these people need to stop having children, and they're like a plague. Humanity is a plague. If that's kind of your framework, it's easy to get pulled in to fascist rhetoric, and because it's more, and so then this is what happens. So it's not like in any of these fascist societies, you just had the middle was somehow like, oh, I'm afraid to say anything or they're going to hurt me. It's like, well, no, I don't like them, but they're getting the job done. And that's how fascism thrives. James writes, what? You mean Trump isn't the common person's billionaire? He wasn't draining a swamp to put up in a parking lot? I'm shocked. Yes. I can tell you're honestly shocked, James.
Actually, the most shocked is the little cat on your head.
Yeah, I saw this new picture of your glasses and somehow it came with a cat attachment.
Cat bomb.
Tyler writes, it's weird how Republicans are able to enact incredibly unpopular policies everywhere they hold power, but Democrats are unable to do wildly popular things, even in places where they hold supermajorities. Overton window.
Yeah.
It's part of it.
Well, it's the Overton window, and it's also very revealing of the fact that maybe the Democrats aren't so much for those popular policies. Right?
Like student debt, like these universal health care. These are fairly popular things, especially in supermajority areas. Adam says they called Reagan the Great Communicator, and people would compare Obama to him. I remember that.
Yeah.
We haven't had such a well-spoken president since Reagan himself. CK writes, look at Louisiana right now. Yeah, great example of.
I mean, southern Louisiana, right? I mean, I mentioned that a while back. I don't know how those people are living right now. I don't know what's going on. There's not much national info about it, but yeah, I mean, it's rapidly becoming uninhabitable.
Adam writes, reminds me of this speech Colin Powell gave on live television when Obama won, and I remember hearing white friends being overjoyed and gushing about how beautiful and inspiring his speech was. All I heard was this conservative military leader assuring rich white folks that the status quo was in good hands.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, Colin Powell is, to me, one of the best examples of the shift in the Overton window. I mean, Colin Powell is a war criminal. He got up in front of the United Nations and lied about weapons of mass destruction to start the war in Iraq. Yep. And he is a right-wing war criminal, and he is now the darling of people who think they're progressive. And I see people who think they're progressive posting pictures of him with that little quote about telling the truth or whatever. It's like, you do know this guy is one of the biggest liars in history, right? Who resulted in the death of hundreds of thousands of people. But that just shows you how far that window has shifted. By the way, Adam has given a shout out to all our awesome friends doing great stuff. Adam released an album today, so go check out his stuff and buy it.
Yep. Look for his name or see more perspective.
That's awesome.
Here we go. Ellen writes, what gives me anxiety is the hidden jumps towards fascism. We've been secretly more like fascists all along. We have concentration camps. We just don't do the ovens. People just don't hear about it or think in the same category.
Well, yeah, and I think that's, this is part of the movement towards trying to tell American history more accurately, because I mean, fascist behavior has been part of America forever. Slavery, Native American schools. I mean, these are all basically fascist behaviors. Even the entire immigration, quote, illegal alien thing is essentially slave labor. The people in the ruling capitalist class know exactly what's going on with folks in our country that aren't being given rights. They're hiring them. And it's not any big mystery where these people are or what they're doing, but it's essentially the real reason that immigration laws don't change is because if they did, all these companies would have to pay folks higher wages, they'd have to pay Social Security, they'd have to pay Medicare, they'd have to pay benefits, and they don't want to do that. And so, for decades, they've been getting away with paying people $2-3 an hour, not paying any kind of benefits. It's essentially slave labor. And so, so part to me of any kind of healing transformation work has got to be acknowledging that these sorts of fascist activities and impulses have been part of our country all along.
This is well put. If we don't wrap our heads around the idea that capitalism and imperialism are root causes, then it doesn't fucking matter how much you recycle.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's hard for a lot of us because we feel powerless. And so we try to do what little things we can. But then we do them for reasons that are not accurate to reality. So do I recycle because I think I'm doing, quote unquote, doing my part? Or am I doing it as a practice that I hope opens up to more practice that go deeper? Same with gardening. Mm-hmm. If we look at this as somehow this is my one act of changing the world, and we just think about it that way, and I mean, I think that's just a way of just feeling catharsis without any real transformation. I don't want to oversell that point, but there's 3 caps that Adam wants to tell us about, so I'm just going to leave that there. Adam writes, the horror of Fort Snelling and everything bit represents happened. This happens less than 150 years ago. So Fort Snelling is a local fort. There's a lot of these all over the country. In this particular case, it was built as a way of having the United States military keep the Dakota people in check during the quote-unquote Dakota uprising. And what the reality is a gigantic concentration camp, and a lot of people died. And so that there's been many versions of the story across this continent. And it's still there, and it's this kind of tourist attraction for kids. And they tell some of the truth there, but it's still generally seen as a bit of American history rather than, look, this is an Auschwitz type situation. We don't want to talk about that way. Catherine writes, Avengers movie, Thanos seemed like a pretty good betrayal of zero power analysis, Malthus-inspired fascist ideology. Oh no, there are just too many people, period, in all parts of the universe. Which they never explain this. I don't understand how because there's all these planets in the Marvel universe, they couldn't figure it out. I don't know. Or why didn't he use the glove to produce a new kind of corn? I don't understand what Thanos is. Anyways. There's too many people in all parts of the universe. Destroying half of them is the only solution I can imagine. Then the heroes never address the many other potential solutions to scarcity and injustice. Just try to kill Thanos equals cue me yelling at the TV for all of Avengers Infinity War and Endgame. Yes.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a great example. I want a video of you yelling at the TV.
James writes, it's like when people quote that Eisenhower farewell speech about disarmament with no sense of the irony that he was one of the architects of the Cold War.
Right, exactly.
CK writes, there's been a slow paradigm shift of the grotesque in humanity and what we are okay with. Adam writes, right on, Dan. That's what I've been saying for years. Immigrants put in so much work with none of the benefits, and we're constantly being screamed at about people leeching off society. It's very clear who the leeches are. It's boggling that anyone buys it, which I guess connects to the fact that a lot of these conservative talking points are not part of a good faith discourse, but rather sophistry meant to keep us on the defensive. Well said, Adam. And I guess this will be the final word because we're past time. Ellen writes, did you all know, audience included, undocumented immigrants pay taxes? It's not like they're paid under the table. Meanwhile, only 40% of citizens who are supposed to pay taxes do so. It's an old statistic. I mean, the whole thing about the economic drain that immigrants cause is entire bullshit.
Yeah.
And so it's just these are lies in order to feed a certain narrative. It's sophistry. It's just like Adam says, like it's conservatives are great at framing the debate, and then the Democratic Party and the progressives generally respond without actually forging its own vision. Cat bomb.
Oh, it's the cat bomb. Okay, yes. Like James's cat.
Yeah.
It's the cat bomb.
That's the closing words for today is cat bomb, everybody.
Cat bomb. All right, so read series article, buy Adam's album.
Yes, yes.
You'll be richly blessed by both. And thanks for listening here and hanging out with us. Mm-hmm. And we will be back next week.
See you next week.